In today's episode, I'm going to tell you about another North Carolina icon who made an impact all around the world. Today's episode is about Billy Graham. Welcome to the NC Everything podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is the bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. Thank you all for joining me again. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I'm in the shop. It's kind of rough weather outside, and it was like 80 degrees yesterday, and today's high was like 55 or something, and the wind's blowing about 20 miles an hour. But despite North Carolina's frequently changing weather, I hope everybody's doing all right overall. Before we get into it, I just want to say, like I kind of mentioned before, if you're listening and you want to watch, you can find me on YouTube with the links below. And if you're watching and you rather just listen, I can be found on most podcast players. As you're watching and listening, you can also check out the links below for the Facebook group. And there's a contact button down there where you can suggest an episode. And if you want more NC everything, I do a show with my wife called Tasting NC, and there'll be a link in the description for Tasting NC, where we taste everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. And I don't have a whole lot more to say. I'm pretty tired. Again, like most episodes, I just got off work a little while ago, and you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not only in my shop, but I'm kind of relaxed back in my chair a little bit. I'm pretty tired, but we're going to go ahead and jump into the content. Now, I can go ahead and tell you, I haven't recorded it yet, but I can tell you this is probably going to be a pretty short episode. But Billy Graham, he lived a pretty simple life. I wouldn't say short life, but definitely his life was simple and sweet, straight to the point. And that's how this episode is going to be, I suppose. Oh, and also, this episode was suggested by Harris from Parts Unknown in North Carolina. I'm assuming he's from North Carolina. But thank you, Harris, for the suggestion. And here we go with Billy Graham. William Franklin Graham Jr. was born in 1918, November 7th, 1918, on a dairy farm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And no, I didn't really have to add the North Carolina part, but that was in my notes, and I was just reading along. Now, Billy Graham, William Graham, everybody knows he goes by Billy now, but Billy, he was the first kid born in his family, but he'd go on to have 3 other siblings. Now, Billy Graham's parents were Calvinists, and I had to look that up. Wikipedia says Calvinism, also called Reformed Christianity, is a major branch of Protestantism that follows the theological tradition and forms of Christian practice set down by John Calvin and various other Reformation-era theologians. It emphasizes the sovereignty of God and the authority of the Bible. Now, I'm not here to give you a church sermon. This isn't a religious podcast. Even though we're talking about the great Billy Graham, I probably won't be talking a whole lot about God in this episode. I'm going to stick mostly to Billy Graham's life, and so that's probably the most preaching you'll get in this episode. And by the way, I said it was windy outside. I'm starting to hear stuff hit the metal roof. I don't know if that's going to pick up on the mic or not, but it sounds like it is fall. It's called fall for a reason, but it sounds like a lot of stuff is blowing around out there. Anyway, so Billy Graham's parents were Calvinists, but it would actually be a traveling evangelist who would kind of set Billy Graham on his path that we all know he took. This evangelist was a guy named Mordecai Ham. So at age 16, Graham, he starts going to this series of revival meetings, and he meets this guy, Mordecai Ham. And he's pretty inspired by the guy. So after high school, he moves to Tennessee, and he enrolls in the Christian school, Bob Jones College. But he really didn't feel like he fit in at the school. It wasn't going real well for him. So he leaves there and transfers to the Florida Bible Institute. And while he's down there in Florida, he joins the Southern Baptist Convention Church, and this is where he was first ordained in 1939. He graduates from the Florida school with a bachelor's in theology, and from there he goes to Illinois and enrolled in Wheaton College so he can further train in theology. It was here that he would meet Ruth McHugh Bell, and a few years later, in 1943, they'd get married, eventually go on to have 5 children. So now Billy Graham, he's been ordained, he's finished his education, and he's got a wife. And now it's time for his first charge. And if you're unfamiliar, when a preacher joins a church, he's sent there. It's called a charge. I'm not sure if it's called, if they say he's charged to that church, but it's like his mission. That's his charge. I hope that makes sense. But Billy Graham's first charge was at the First Baptist Church in Western Springs, Illinois. Or Illinois. My friend, she gives me hell about saying Illinois, but Illinois, Western Springs, First Baptist Church. But he wasn't there very long. He left to join a youth group called Youth for Christ. And their whole mission was servicemen returning from war, or I guess any servicemen, they spread the word of God to Army personnel. Then in 1947, he became the president of Northwestern Schools. And Northwestern Schools was like a group of schools in Minnesota. It was a group of Christian schools, obviously, in Minnesota. And once he got up there and started working for Northwestern Schools, he resigned from that Youth for Christ. And that was 1948. In 1952, he resigns from Northwestern Schools and decides to focus on nothing but preaching. And this is when he really started getting a lot of attention. When he started focusing on preaching, people really started enjoying his sermons, and like I said, they were really drawn to him and the way he spread the word. Now, I said that I won't talk too much God in here, and I'm not. But even when I didn't go to church much, even when I don't go to church much, which is right now, I don't go to church very often, I've always enjoyed a good sermon. It was something my dad probably put in me. Even when we didn't go to church, several times on Sunday mornings, my dad would cut on a sermon, probably Billy Graham sermons on occasion. And so I carried that with me into my adulthood. My favorite part about church is the sermon. And maybe that sounds kind of funny because that's the core of the church. What I mean is, I don't care as much about the fellowship and holding hands. I don't care as much about singing songs. I love the music, but I don't care as much about that. I enjoy hearing the sermon. And I think that's the way Billy Graham was. He could put on a really good sermon, and it attracted a lot of people. Eventually, a group called Christ for Greater Los Angeles, they heard Billy preach, and they invited him out to L.A. to preach at one of their revivals. Right around this time, Billy Graham had gotten on the radio, and he talked about the revival and done some preaching on the radio. And so when he finally went out to L.A., a lot of people traveled out to L.A. with him to hear him preach at this L.A. revival. And while he was out here, he met a bigwig in a newspaper named William Randolph Hearst. And William Randolph Hearst, he kind of helped get some publicity on Billy Graham. So eventually, newspapers around the country were talking about this preacher from North Carolina. And this eventually turns Billy Graham into more or less a Christian celebrity. By the way, that guy, William Randolph Hearst, he was the grandfather to the infamous Patty Hearst. And if you don't know who Patty Hearst is, you can kind of look that up. But she went down in history for staging her own kidnapping. It's speculated that one thing that made Billy Graham was the time in our history. This was kind of around the time of the Red Scare, and Billy Graham talked very publicly against communism and how evil it was. And at that time, and I'm not picking on anybody, but during the Red Scare, everybody was worried about communism. So naturally, everybody wanted to hear what Billy Graham had to say about it. As Billy Graham's fame rose and rose and rose, he eventually decided to go even bigger, and he started the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, or BGEA. And this is when he started preaching on television. His sermons would be broadcasted on this Christian TV show called Songs in the Night. And during all this, he also had a radio segment he would do called The Hour of Decision. Well, it wasn't long after he formed the BGEA that The Hour of Decision became a TV show instead of a radio show. And it says that show ran for 3 years. Now, after he formed the BGEA and his fame, it just kept growing and growing and growing. Well, this is when he started publishing like it says periodicals, but like a magazine or pamphlets. He started making records, tapes. He would make videos, and he started writing books too. And it was about this time he started he come up with this group called the Crusaders too. And what they would do, he would, he was televising his sermons. His Crusaders would go out and try to get people to commit to Christ, and they'd follow these Crusaders around, and there'd be videos of people committing to Christ and joining local churches. Well, then in 1952, he came out with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Film Ministry. And what they would do would just speak to Christians, have personal conversations with them. They would record these conversations. I mean, they knew they were getting recorded, but they would pass out and spread these personal conversations about Christ around the country, around the world, again, as a means to turn people toward Christ. And I was talking about, periodicals, magazines. In 1955, they created Christianity Today. And it says that today that's still the leading journal for evangelical Christians. Now, me personally, I don't know if I've ever seen a Christian Today, but apparently when it took off in 1955, like everything else with Billy Graham, it really took off like wildfire. Anyway, another magazine called Decisions, nope, singular, not plural, Decision. It was a monthly magazine that came with articles and Bible studies, and it was sent to churches to kind of pass out to church members around the country. I talked about Billy Graham writing books. He would eventually write 33 books, including his autobiography called Just As I Am, which was published in 1997. And not everybody loved Billy Graham. He was considered to be liberal. I don't know how he voted or what side of the lines he stayed on, but he was considered to be a liberal Christian, which, isn't too well accepted. So some people called him like simple-minded. Somebody once said he did more harm to the cause of Jesus Christ than any other living man. And President Harry S. Truman said he was a counterfeit. However, most of the world loved him. He didn't have too many naysayers. I had come across one article that said they called him the Pope of Protestant America. And, that doesn't sound like too bad of a thing. I mean, there's a magazine called The Gallup, and they rated him one of the 10 most admired men in the world 51 times. So that goes to show you right there, his naysayers didn't say nay too much. I mean, the world loved Billy Graham. And speaking of awards, he was awarded the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Freedom Award, the Congressional Gold Medal, the Templeton Foundation Prize for Progress in Religion, the Big Brother Award, the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion. That's on there twice. Maybe he won it twice. I said it twice. And the Speaker of the Year Award. Now, this episode alone, I've been singing his praises, and he deserves it. He, very influential guy. They said he was humorous and nice. I mean, he tried to help the world. It's hard to hate anybody who's trying to help the world. But like all my episodes, eventually it must come to an end. In 1992, he was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, which is, they describe it as being similar to Parkinson's disease. Eventually, he got too sick to run the BGEA, and so his son, William Franklin Graham III, was chosen to take over. And finally, in 2005, after preaching to 185 countries and to millions of people all around the world, Billy and his wife, Ruth, retired. They went home to Montreat, North Carolina in 2005. They retired to Montreat, North Carolina. In 2007, Ruth Graham passed away from pneumonia and degenerative osteoarthritis. And 11 years later, Billy Graham passed away in Montreat at the age of 99. And that's Billy Graham. So, if you were listening, from age 16 to age 99, Billy Graham did nothing but try to help the world. I've told a lot of stories on this show where people done some really bad things. I've told a lot of stories where people done some really bad things, and then they found a way to redeem themselves. But there's not, to me, in all my research, there's not really any bad thing I could say about Billy Graham. Now, to be honest, I haven't ever read any of his 33 books. His son, Franklin, did write a book, and I remember reading most of that book. I don't remember where I got it, where I found it, but even though I'm not a devout Christian, and I'm not a Bible thumper. I don't go to church every Sunday and Wednesday night. I did enjoy Franklin's book. But anyway, that's the life of Billy Graham. I hope you all enjoyed the show. I know it was short, but sometimes I got to throw some short ones in there, and I didn't mind this one. Like I said at the beginning of the show, check out the links below for more NC everything. And thank you again, Harris, for suggesting Billy Graham. And if you have an idea for a show or just want to say, hey, how you doing? Don't forget, check out the links. But my email address is the ncEverythingPodcast@gmail.com. Now I'm getting pretty cold out here, so I'm going to head in the house and warm up, and I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.